I want to welcome you to another Facebook and YouTube Live. And as we're getting ready for another school year, I hope this finds all of you that are joining me here or listen to the audio or video recording are doing really well and excited because a new year, just like at the beginning of the first of the year, it's a new beginning. And so there's opportunities despite coming back after the long summer, and hope you've enjoyed it. But, take advantage. And I'm excited to share some information that I hope will encourage and empower you as a nurse educator to bring about and implement needed change in your program. And again, it's great to be with you, coming here from my home office here in Andover, Minnesota, northern suburbs here of Minneapolis. And I'd love to know where you're coming from tonight. So just throw your name in the chat, your city. And it's just such a privilege to share this time together. Just want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule. For about the next 35 to 45 minutes, we'll have a great conversation. We'll have dialogue. I've got my chat box open. So excited to have this opportunity. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Keith. I'm the founder of Keith RN, which is a resource that I created about 9 years ago to help strengthen and encourage educators with innovative best practices to better prepare students for both practice and licensure. And really what kind of makes me unique among other educators out there with the platform is that I'm a nurse educator who is recent in practice. I have 36 years of experience in a wide variety of settings. I never left the bedside as a nurse educator, blessed to have a Baylor weekend position, working 12-hour nights and able to on the weekends and then work during the week. And so, my passion is to help bring practice back into a practice-based profession. And sometimes we struggle to do that in nursing education. And so, I really am here to serve, to shepherd, and support your needs in nursing education. And one of the things that I've done to do that are creating relevant case studies derived from my lens of practice and really bring about those realistic scenarios and the complexities of real world practice is really the foundation of what I do with Keith RN. And as I just as I join you tonight, I wanted to let you know that I am revising the second edition of my student textbook, Think Like a Nurse, and I'll have it out by the end of the year. And I'm excited because it's going to be a complete renovation. It's really my goal with the textbook was to provide practical strategies to really help students narrow on what's most important to practice. But one thing I just wanted to just kind of join in before we jump into our topic with simulation is talking briefly about physical assessment. And what I wanted to get a sense of is that, did you know that we are teaching way too much information of physical assessment skills? We're looking at a new year, a new beginning. I want to encourage us to take a second look at how we're teaching nursing assessment. There's an article in the literature. I hope I can pop this in. And I'm going to just copy and paste here and put this in the chat because it's an article I want all of you who are listening or watching this to be able to access. And I'll pop it in. Yay, it's working just fine. And yeah, Carmen, thank you. It's a pleasure to join, to be here tonight. And Julie, thank you for your encouragement in using the cases. And Jasmine in Houston, and Carol Cook, thanks for joining us tonight. But this article, Improving Physical Assessment and Clinical Judgment Skills Without Increasing Content, identified that we're teaching over 120 to 150 nursing assessment skills. And did you know that a nurse in practice, I want to throw this number out there, put it in the chat. How many nursing assessment skills does the typical bedside nurse use every day and then average on a weekly basis? We're teaching over 120. How many are we really using? The nuts and bolts, the everyday educator, the everyday nurse at the bedside. How many are we really using consistently? And Carol says way too many. Okay, Carol, that's not a number, but give me a number. What do you think are the number of skills that a nurse at the bedside really needs to know? How many? Carol Daly says 20. And, Carol, you are really close. 25 to 30. Carmen, you nailed it. 30 on the high end that a nurse uses consistently. And this article identifies from highlighting several articles in the nursing literature, what are those top 30 skills? This article, and it's actually an open source article, so you can download the PDF, print it up, and I want all of you who are listening and a part of this dialogue and this chat tonight, download that, be part of the needed change, because when we're looking at bringing practice back into our practice-based profession, we can teach it differently. And TMI isn't just a problem in our classrooms, it's a problem in how we teach nursing assessment. Let's put away the tuning forks, the reflex hammers, and the otoscopes once and for all. We're not teaching advanced practice nurses in our generalist nursing programs. Let's lighten it up, because again, like Dr. Benner identified with classroom content and infobesity, when you are teaching concrete novice nurses who have no idea what's most and least important, and we give them 120 skills that you need to master, they think it's all important. But those of us who know better, and those of us that want to bring practice back into our practice-based profession, let's identify those 30. This article will help you do that and give you a foundation to bring about the needed change. And so I just want to encourage you that, that we got to change things in how we teach assessment. And it's one of my goals in the book. I'm rewriting my chapter on pearls of practice with health assessment. And so I'm really excited to help identify those 30 core skills and what they then mean, because what we really need to empower our students, when we give them so much information, they're overwhelmed. But if we lighten their load with 30 or less core skills, and then we talk about, okay, when you're listening to breath sounds and you're hearing crackles, what does it mean? What is going on physiologically? And we're not giving our students so much that they can't get their head around it. They're able to, in essence, okay, crackles is fluid in the alveoli. Could be from pneumonia, could be due to heart failure, usually a potential problem if they're having other signs and symptoms of respiratory distress. So again, we can teach the thinking skills and the interpretation of abnormal findings a lot easier when you don't have 120 skills. And again, we can teach some of the advanced skills, like advanced neurologic skills with have a patient with a stroke. But are you going to do a complete, neuro exam on every patient? No. So we got to kind of identify the core 25 to 30. This article will help you do that. And then identify a core cluster of 25 to 30 more advanced skills, like advanced neuroassessment when it's relevant to your patient's problem, but not all the time. And so I just want to encourage you all to really grab hold of this article. And I want you all to be initiators of a transformation in nursing education, because that's really what motivated me, 9 years ago after reading Pat Benner's work from Educating Nurses, a call for radical transformation. Dr. Benner didn't mince words. Radical transformation doesn't just mean flipping your classrooms or going to a concept-based curriculum. That's minimal transformation. It's a change. But what we're talking about is a complete paradigm shift of practice-based, meaningful, active learning that emphasizes clinical reasoning. And we can do that. And it's my pleasure to just share my thoughts. And I got my thoughts in the chat here. And Jasmine says, hi, which article? Jasmine, just go up about 8 or 10, and you can see that I put the link in called Improving Physical Assessment. So let me see what kind of some of the thoughts in the chat are. Stacy says, I tell my students I've only ever used percussion as a party trick. Yes, I've been a nurse for 36 years, Stacy. I have never percussed a patient's chest, abdomen. Why are we teaching it in some programs? And so, yes, and I don't know who NRSTWN is, but you're in Idaho. Blessing to have you with us tonight. You're having this discussion with faculty. Continue this discussion because it's crazy. We should never be teaching advanced practice skills that a student generalist will never or if ever use in practice. That's just nuts. So let's kind of take a step back and let's be part of that change. And Kayla says, yes, put away the tuning fork. Haven't touched one since school. And Angela says, yes, it is a sacred cow that needs to be brought down. I don't know why it's become a sacred cow. I don't know if it's because a lot of our nurse educators are nurse practitioners. Could that be the reason? They're just bringing in their nurse practitioner level of expertise into the classroom. But again, into the program. And I love nurse practitioners. You have something to offer, but we're teaching first-year generalists. Let's remember that, everybody in the program. So thanks for letting me share that and get that off my chest, because it was just kind of a splinter in my brain that I wanted to relieve tonight. So thank you for letting me share that. And we've been talking the last 2 months or so since summer began on clinical judgment and developing clinical judgment across our curriculum and talking about practical skills to do that. So if you're kind of looking for the summary of this series, I have a YouTube channel, Think Like a Nurse. And so if you're not a subscriber to that, I've got 4-minute summary videos of this series, as well as the complete 45 minutes we do every other Thursday on Facebook Live. It's also YouTube Live. So it's on YouTube as well. But, just going to briefly highlight in just a couple minutes. And I want you to go back to those videos. And I'm just going to highlight what we've discussed. And I'll let you decide what you want to brush up on if you missed a session or two. In part 1, we talked about defining clinical judgment and why it's important to define it correctly. And so remember that clinical judgment is an outcome. It can't be taught directly. And what I talked about in part 1 was how we need to teach our students to critically think plus clinically reason leads to the outcome of a correct clinical judgment. So critical thinking is taking place in the classroom. It's what your students really understand about what you teach them. That's like nursing assessment, these physical assessment skills. We teach them so much, they don't really understand it. They really don't have it in their, it's too much information. And therefore it gets lost in the weeds. And then the reasoning is what takes place in clinical at the bedside. But they must understand knowledge, pathophysiology examples, and to take it into their practice. In week 2, we talked about frameworks, or part 2, on frameworks to teach clinical judgment. And I really want to encourage us to take a step back. Many leading educators, prominent educators, are advocating the NCSBN model of clinical judgment and their 6 steps, teaching that, recognizing cues, analyzing cues, generate hypotheses. Only one problem with that. That's not a theoretical framework to teach clinical judgment. It's a test model. It's a test model only researched for testing and evaluating clinical judgment. Let's not teach to the test. Let's teach for practice. That's why I'm a huge advocate of Tanner's clinical judgment model. It's a research, evidence-based, practice-based framework. And practice doesn't use the language of hypotheses and cues. Why are we teaching it as if that's the foundation? Make that the foundation for the final semester, preparing for your NCLEX prep, but not the curriculum. That's just my thoughts. So I'd love your feedback. If you think I'm going over the edge, let me know. Part 3 was on case studies. Why case studies are really the foundational strategy to develop and teach clinical judgment. Then we talked about practical strategies to bring innovative classroom teaching with application, context. I just want to say this about classroom teaching. Everything you teach needs to have a context to practice in order for it to really stick and for your students to remember it. Last time we talked in part 5, we talked about clinical judgment in the clinical. We talked about asking the right questions. What are those questions, those open-ended questions based on Tanner's framework of clinical judgment that can help you to bring about those questions that can read a student's mind? When you really ask the right questions, you can see what your students know and what they don't know. So let's jump into tonight's topic. And tonight we're going to be talking about strengthening simulation and using simulation to develop clinical judgment. And so if you have questions about how you're doing simulation, and if you're really strengthening or developing the clinical judgment, please throw it in the chat. And so again, this is a dialogue. I want your feedback, but I'd also like to know, as you look at simulation, this is kind of the challenge with simulation. It is shown to be a very effective strategy, especially your mid to high fidelity sim, the sim man, the skills lab, all that we do. It's a beautiful thing. Problem is, in most programs, our students don't get enough repetition. They don't get enough reps in the sim lab. And like I talked about with case studies, studies have shown it takes about 8 case studies a semester of that simulated thinking to make a difference and impact critical thinking and other clinical judgment metrics. Simulation is the same in principle. It needs that repetition. It needs additional reps. And so when you look at clinical judgment, it's the most important skill our students must possess. But like sterile technique, it needs to be practiced. And so simulation, one of the weaknesses is it's a great pedagogy, great strategy. Most programs don't get enough. So I'd like to know in your program, how many reps of simulation where your students are a decision maker or actively engaged in simulation in the course of a single semester? On average, semester 1, 2, 3, 4, how many reps are your programs getting? I know where I've taught, if they get 2, we're doing well. So I'd love to see those numbers pop up in the chat. So let me know your thoughts so I can kind of get a sense as far as, if some programs are really rocking it or if we're still struggling, because I really think that 4 should be our goal, just based on what I know of the literature and just as it relates to case-based learning, which is, again, a low fidelity simulation. But again, it practices the thinking just as it does in a high fidelity simulation. So just a thought. So anyways, what we're going to be talking about. So I've just got some feedback here. I'll throw it out there. So Stacy says at least 4 per semester. Awesome. And so that's great, Stacy. I'm glad to see you're getting those reps. Carol says we do 7-week course. They have 1 sim day per rotation. There are several more at the end with advanced nursing. So looks like they're getting in Carol's program, doing well there. Anybody else? I'll keep my eyes on the chat on my left side here as I share tonight. So anyways, we're going to be talking about kind of some practical strategies to literally double the impact of clinical reasoning skills and developing that kind of additional repetitions, how you can leverage using case studies, simulation, and I'm going to share some practical ways to do that. So stay tuned. And so when you look at one strategy I'll be talking about, the first strategy is called a hybrid simulation activity. And what this really is really simple, is that instead of just having your students show up for simulation that day, they wear their uniform, the stethoscope, they come into sim prepared. Kind of do what you do in clinical. Have them basically do some prep work. And one of the pieces of prep work could be an unfolding case study that is relevant to the topic. So like, let's say you're doing a heart failure simulation and you want them to recognize certain aspects of physical assessment related to heart failure, whatever it may be. Assign a heart failure case study as a pre-simulation activity, because what we want to do is we want to basically do 2 things. We want them to come into the simulation with the knowledge that is relevant to the simulation. And a case study that is well written basically provides a simulation in a context of essential content related to heart failure, the lab values, etc., as well as reasoning questions, which is really what I've done with my Keith RN cases. I've really taken Tanner's framework, made them open-ended questions, and basically it is in essence that low fidelity sim. So you could assign, for example, if you have access to the membership that I have for educators, or just purchase the heart failure case study on keithrn.com, you can use the PDF, the student version PDF, and your students can basically use that, work through it before they come to sim. And then in simulation, you're going to then review it in 15 to 20 minutes, whatever that time allotment is, kind of go through it, make sure they all got it. And then you're going to do a simulation on a different heart failure patient. It's not going to be the same case study. It's going to be a heart failure focus, but you just want to kind of set the buffet, set the table, so they have the knowledge and they've already kind of practiced in reasoning with these reasoning questions, the essence of the priority setting required in heart failure. And what our goal is, it's really simple. Transferring the knowledge from what they've done intellectually with a meaningful and relevant clinical reasoning focused case study, and then transferring that knowledge to a completely different scenario, but it's the same topic. And that's really our goal in clinical teaching. We want them to take, what they took from last clinical's patient and apply it to this week's patient and the week after that, so that we're scaffolding and building. So this is a strategy. And the reason for my madness is that if you assign a well-written unfolding case study, such as a skinny reasoning, they're practicing the reasoning, they're using the knowledge and the same essence of what they would get with a clinical patient. They're now seeing if we can transfer that into that simulation. And so that's basically just taking a case study and making it an assigned activity before they come to simulation. Very simple, but they're getting double the repetition of reasoning because the case study uses Tanner's framework. Like, what did you notice that's meaningful or relevant? Why is it significant? And then they get the sim, real world. So they're kind of getting that double your money. And that's kind of just one strategy. It's called a hybrid simulation activity. Then I'm going to share a second strategy that's basically similar but different. You have, for example, the same case study. What you're going to do this time, though, is that you're going to assign, like, let's say 3 pages out of the 4. Okay? You work through those 3 pages of the case study. Now, the simulation, you pre-brief before the simulation, go through it just like you did on the first example. But now, the simulation begins where the case study patient left off. It's the same patient, it's the same scenario. So now the simulation just simply unfolds from where the case study is. Wherever you decide, and this is where you as a sim lab coordinator or a faculty, this can simplify simulation. Many of us, are just racking our brains, trying to come up with good scenarios and simulations and this and that and da. Just want you to know you can take a skinny reasoning case study that I've written, and you can basically just make that the preparing the way for then the actual of what you want it to be. So, so for example, you could, work through the first 2 to 3 pages, and then it leaves off where the education begins. And now you're going to teach the patient. And so now that's the focus of simulation. Now, what are you going to teach your patient about heart failure? What will that look like? You're on. And let's basically then see how they do. You could also do an S-bar. That's where, you got you've got all this information. Now you got to give report to the oncoming nurse or give it to the patients being transferred. Whatever it may be, you can be as, creative, but meet your course objectives. And you can basically enter into the case study anywhere you choose to. And so what I want to do is just share with you real briefly a skinny reasoning case study on heart failure. And what I want you to see is basically just kind of how this would look and what this could possibly look like. So I just want to give you a vision. I just want to get the wheels spinning tonight is kind of my goal. And so that's kind of what I'd like to do, and just show you a skinny reasoning, which is the shortest and most concise case study I have with as it relates to the resources that I've written and developed. And so let me just show you this from the beginning. This is a heart failure patient, and her name is Joanne Smith. She's 72, history of MI, and she's got systolic heart failure with a myopathy with an EF of only 15%. She comes to the ER with shortness of breath the past 3 days. It's progressed from shortness of breath with activity to shortness of breath at rest. The last 2 nights, she has had to sleep in a recliner chair to rest comfortably upright. She is able to speak only in partial sentences and has to take a breath when talking to the nurse. She has increased swelling in her lower legs and gained 6 pounds the last 3 days. She's being transferred from the ED to the cardiac step-down unit where you're the nurse assigned to her. And so now it begins. It's got a social history, but the very first questions are the same for all skinny reasoning. What data from the histories is relevant and then has significant? And so they have to notice the relevant data, then interpret it. Now you have a set of vital signs. Now you have to look at the vital signs and say, what's relevant there and important or significant to the nurse and why? Now you have physical assessment findings. You've got crackles, you've got JVD, etc. What's relevant and why? Oh, and by the way, you've got this rhythm. If your students if they're advanced students and you've taught telemetry, let's take a quick look. Does that look like sinus rhythm? Don't see P waves. I don't see irregularity. Let's see how your students do with that. Now you've got lab values. You've got the most current BMP, the CBC, and cardiacs, including the BNP, the brain natriuretic peptide. And then you're trending, and you're looking at the most recent to the current. And you're basically then identifying what's relevant labs, the significance, and the trend. And that's just the first 2 pages of the case study. Now it comes to part 2, 2 other pages. What's the primary problem in the pathophysiology? Now you have 6 orders. What does the nurse do? What's the rationale for the medical plan of care and the expected outcome? What's the nursing priority in plan of care is question 3. What are the holistic care priorities? And then finally, education and discharge. And so I just want you to get a vision to say, where could you step off? Based on the content that you're teaching. You can jump off this case study at any time based on what your objectives are for your simulation. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you to just give you a quick heads up to just have a kind of a different strategy or just a new approach to help you kind of empower you to just simulation a little differently and empower you to kind of be part of that needed change. And so just got some other feedback here. Sarah says they do 2 sims per semester, by semester, 4 to 5 scenarios per day for our ADN program. So you're doing a great job. 45 hours of sim for another 1 to 2 scenarios per group, 1 to 2 sims per day. She says our school could do better. I think it's important to realize that, adopt the motto of the Lowe's Home Improvement, never stop improving. Not just your home, but also all that you do in nursing education. So let me just kind of share one more strategy. So it was the hybrid activity. Let the case study finish your simulation is strategy 2. The third strategy is the power of debriefing and reflection on your thinking. This is why it's so powerful when Tanner's framework of clinical judgment is really understood and incorporated by educators in your practice. The 4th step of Tanner, the noticing. I want you to memorize this if you haven't yet. First step is, what do you notice? Second step is, what's the interpretation? What does it mean of what you've noticed? The third is responding with the plan of care. The 4th step of Tanner is reflecting on your thinking. And this is why debriefing during simulation or after simulation is so powerful. But debriefing is not just for simulation. To develop the clinical judgment our students require for safe practice and licensure, debriefing needs to take place in your classroom, when you're using a case study, when you're in simulation, and in clinical post-conference. So in those three areas, we need to have a consistency to how we use debriefing. And I want to just I want to share a couple of strategies or frameworks for you. For those of you that are not in the sim world, there's a couple of articles I want to commend you with. And let's see if this one went through. There it is. It is Getting Started with Debriefing for Meaningful Learning. That's Kristen Dryfurst. And that's an article that is a PDF that you can access on the internet. And she uses a framework of 6 steps. It's a little involved, but it uses Socratic questioning to really unpackage a student's thinking. So again, Socratic questioning, another powerful strategy to develop clinical judgment. And so I just want you to recognize that Dryfurst, that article is really a need to read if you really want to kind of understand some additional principles of debriefing and to kind of have a framework of debriefing. Another one I want to commend you to is an article by Kathy Lassiter. It's called, let me get this in the chat. There we go. Simulation Debriefing for Clinical Judgment Development. Love the article title. It's Lassiter and another colleague, but there's the link and you can download that as a PDF. So I want you to print up some paper. I want you to kill a few trees. It's going to be worth it because development of clinical judgment in our students is worth it. And so again, that's just another powerful strategy using Tanner's framework of clinical judgment. This is, again, having a unified theoretical framework in your curriculum will strengthen the development of clinical judgment. I'm also going to commend you to one other single-page PDF that I found on the internet that uses Tanner's framework of clinical judgment. And it's a guide for reflective journaling using Tanner's clinical judgment model. It's a wonderful, simple strategy that basically reflective journaling should be done every clinical. Our students need to personally reflect, in my opinion, after simulation, after clinical. That's where we can really go deep. Now, we can do it in a simulation debriefing, but it's usually done in a group. But when a student individually reflects, and you as a faculty can get inside their head because they're sharing their deepest thoughts of nursing judgments that they made or didn't make well, you can provide gentle feedback. You can provide affirmation, encouragement, and guidance to strengthen their thinking for future clinicals and practice. And so I want to know, what are your favorite debriefing questions? You know, all of us as faculty, we use questions in the clinical, we use them in the classroom, we use them in simulation. There's frameworks that I want to commend you to, which is why I included those in the link. But I also would love to know, what are your go-to questions? Because this is where we can learn from each other. You know, I want to have my time to share my thoughts, but you know what? I've got many educators in this chat live right now. I want to give you a voice. So you know what? Put your thoughts in the chat. What's your go-to questions? Share them with the group here, because you can literally impact hundreds of educators who watch these Facebook and YouTube lives, either live or because it's a recording. They live forever on the internet, for better or for worse. I think these are for better. This is a good use of social media. And bottom line is that you know, your chat comments will live also on the internet. So if you've got some thoughts and some questions that you use, I'd love to see them. Until I see a question or two in the chat, I'm going to share you a few of mine and let you know, see what you think. First question, I think that's really important, especially if we're in simulation as well as in clinical, is what did you feel in this experience? You know, we've got to get inside the affective or affective domain of our students. You know, we're so focused on the cognitive, think like a nurse, think like a nurse. I'm guilty as charged, but we've got to get inside their feelings and their emotions and to tap into that. Especially in the clinical setting where it's real world. Simulation, yeah, you may harm the sim man and the sim man may die, and that's traumatic. But it's not the same when you see things in clinical practice that are really painful and traumatic. My second question is, what judgments did you make in this simulation? And were they the best decision? So kind of flesh out, what decisions did you make in this simulation or in clinical? Again, the same questions can be used in clinical. So I want you to use these as well in clinical. But were they the best decision? That's called thinking in action using Tanner's framework of reflection. It's in the moment. Look at every decision. Was it right, wrong, or could it be improved? We want our students to adopt the motto of Lowe's Home Improvement Stores, never stop improving as well, and to never settle. Third question is, what would you do differently? Anything that you would do differently in this simulation or in clinical? Same principle. And what did you learn from this simulation? What were the opportunities that you didn't know well? And if you didn't know something well, or you made an error in judgment, what caused the error? Get to it, like do your own little root cause analysis, and then remediate those weaknesses. Hold your students to a plan to basically say, okay, you know what? I have to review this content. I didn't know this that well. I'm going to review this in the chapter, and I'm going to basically boom, 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 boom. And they develop their own literally plan of clinical judgment to basically improve clinical judgment. Final question I just want to share with you. How will you apply what you learned to future patients? I think that's probably the most important, because that's the scaffolding or the transfer of learning from any setting, whether it be a clinical setting in our clinical after post-conference, or it be a simulation. How will you take what you learned? What was your takeaway, or 2 or 3, that you learned that you can transfer to patient care? Because again, we're teaching a practice-based profession. We must never lose sight of that, because sometimes the NCLEX and next gen, you know what it does? It clouds our thinking, and these glasses we wear get muddy and foggy, and all we can see is licensure, NCLEX success. Well, if I'm basically, I see it a little differently. I see NCLEX success as important. We want our students to be successful. But I think we need to make a priority of preparing our students for practice. And when we use educational best practices, and all that I've shared with you in this series, using Tanner, principles from Dr. Benner's work from educating nurses, we can do both. We can prepare our students for real world practice. And by the way, they'll pass the licensure, including next gen, when you use open-ended case studies that emphasize and use Tanner's framework, because the NCSBN model borrows extensively from Tanner. So just a thought. I want to see your questions though. So let's take a look here and see what you guys have. Sarah says this: students are afraid of failure, so I focus on the positive first. What did you feel you did right, and why? And Sarah, that's awesome, because, students are insecure, just like all of us are, even as educators. We have our own insecurities and fears, especially if we're new. So the bottom line is, kind of addressing, the positive and what did you feel you did right? And then why? Why is a Socratic question. It's a 2-year-old question, but it's basically that rationale. What's the reasoning behind your judgment? And we can unpackage the thinking that went behind it. We can identify the errors in thinking that may have been made, or what they did right, and say, attaboy, you're on the right track. So great feedback, Sarah. Thank you for sharing that. And Carol says, I ask students what they feel they did well, and also what they could have done differently. So Carol, me and you are on the right track. We're just I shared basically the essence of those 2 reflective questions. And so if anybody's got any additional thoughts as it relates to clinical judgment and reflection questions, I'd love to hear it. So when you look at that kind of the takeaways that I want you to have from tonight's session on developing clinical judgment and simulation, the 3 strategies, real simple. Number 1, hybrid case study. Have basically a case study as a pre-activity that they just take that knowledge and hopefully can transfer it to a different sim. The continuation of the case study, where they basically have this case study, it ends, and now simulation begins where we left off. But we're always reviewing everything up until the point as part of our pre-briefing and simulation. And then we take off together to the actual sim. And then the third is just asking the right questions. Again, we can develop the clinical reasoning, and their thinking processes at the bedside by asking the right questions. That was the takeaway from last week's or last session's part 5, or basically simulation, which is what we've been talking about tonight. And so if you have any other questions, throw it in the chat. And in closing, I just want you to know that I've got a couple of resources here. Forgot to grab it from my bookcase, but I'll share it with you right here. Got a faculty guide to develop clinical judgment. And this is a resource that's free if you're a member in the All-Inclusive membership. And it's about 40 pages. It takes everything I've shared in this series. And we basically only have one session or one part left, which is going to be in 2 weeks from today, on writing test questions. Writing case-based test questions. So that's going to be a good one. I don't want you to miss it. But I talk about basically most of that and all of what we've covered in that faculty guide. And so you can purchase that on my website, KeithRN. I just want to share that link with you. And I'm glad to give you a discount code of 20% when you just use KeithRN20. And just pop that in the box when you check out, and that's there for you. I also want to let you know that I've got an all-inclusive membership for educators. Though one of the best kept secrets, I don't hope it's not a secret anymore, but basically is that I've got 110 case studies, unfolding, skinny reasoning, different levels of complexity that all come with a student version answer key that you can use. They're ready to rumble. You don't have to develop a thing. That are across the entire curriculum. I've been very busy the last several years, and I've got a lot of great educators around the country who help me write the specialty topics. I've got handouts for clinical judgment. I've got contact hours on really the essential content to really help educators be successful and prepare our students for real world practice. And so just want you to know that that link will just give you more information. I can offer departmental memberships at a significant discount. So if you're looking for tools, active learning, because our goal is to make active learning happen in the classroom every time we teach, and that resource can be a real friend to you all. So I just want you to know it's there for you. And I also want you to know I also got some free resources on my website, keithrn.com. And so I've got a free case study on COVID-19. If you've never taken advantage of that, I want to pop that in the chat and share that with you. I've also got handouts on pathophysiology, the applied sciences. And so really, it's my passion to really just provide educators with the handouts, the tools, the resources that will strengthen student learning. So I just want you to take advantage of that and take it from there. And I just want you to know that if you have any questions, it's my passion to really just be available to any educator who has a question, a challenge. You can email me at keith@keithrn.com. But another great resource I just want to leave you with is that I am blessed to be the admin of a nurse educator group called Teachers Transforming Nursing Education. And it's a wonderful supportive community of over 8,700 educators in nursing around the country, Canada, and other parts of the world. And they're sharing files. You can ask any question and you'll get posts, dozens of responses from this community. So if you're just kind of have a struggle, a challenge in general that you just don't know what to do, go to this Facebook group. It's a closed group. Let me know you're an educator. I'll let you inside, and then be active and participate and respond to others and just take 15, 30 minutes a day and really kind of get your tank full as well as get your questions answered. So I just want you to know that community is available to any nurse educator who is listening. So I want you to be a part of that. And I respond to posts as well. And I'm very busy, but I'd love to kind of keep my finger on the pulse, and I reply and I try to share what I can share to help educators with expertise that I can that's in my wheelhouse. And so anyways, next 2 weeks, we will be talking about writing case-based test questions to really get our students prepared for next gen NCLEX. But the good news is you can start doing that right now in this upcoming school year. I'm going to share some real simple strategies for you to do that. So I hope you join me in 2 weeks. I'll have the link if you're on my if you get my friend, my Facebook group, Keith RN Think Like a Nurse, and you've friended that, whatever you do, you'll get the notifications as a reminder. So anyways, thanks for joining me tonight. And I look forward to connecting with you in 2 weeks, and blessings to your new year. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.